Hi. Oh, and I see we have Harold, and hopefully one or two more will join as we get underway. But as we're at the top of the hour, I did want to start us out so that we have plenty of time for any questions that you may have. Hi, Harold. And I'll continue working to get people's audio sorted in the background. Well, just for the sake of the recording and a bit of an introduction of what we're doing here today is we're looking at the implementation quality assessment tool, what we've been lovingly referring to as IQA, for each of the core project models we apply to health. And today we're talking about the community committee's IQA, which in short is a checklist of the essential elements of this core project model. Now, why have we decided for extra focus? We've had several evaluations of our programs and multi-country evaluations and research studies. And recommendations have come out of each of these saying that the IQA tool is being underutilized. And we think that the IQA tool, while great for monitoring visits, it could also be used very effectively in planning of our core project models as well as advocacy with our ministry partners and other partners in the field. And so as a community of practice, we wanted to make sure that we had a good recording of this tool and how to use this tool so that we can refer back to it. And we also wanted to give you, our community of practice, an opportunity to speak with subject matter experts in each of our core project models to ask questions about using this tool, ask questions about understanding each of the essential elements. What I've liked about these orientations over the last couple of weeks is that we've gotten some good insight as to where there are most frequently challenges and where most frequently where we're noticing where we need extra support within the elements of these checklists. And so I invite you today to bring those comments, bring your challenges, because we continue to learn and learn how to adapt how we do our project guidance. All right, so today our subject matter expert for our COMM IQA is Michelle Gaudreau, who's been championing community committees for several years now. And so Michelle, I appreciate your time. Welcome back from the field. She's been in the field several days this week. And I'm just going to turn this over to you by giving you the presenter role. Start as you are ready.
Thank you, Sarah. And thanks to those of you on the call. Maybe quickly, because we are a small group, I know Carmen and Catherine, but I don't know Grace and Harold. I can see that Grace still doesn't have her audio set up, but Harold, would you want to unmute and just quickly introduce yourself? Grace is Uganda, says Sarah. Okay, wonderful. Harold, I don't hear you.
You didn't hear me?
Okay, now I do. Good.
Okay. Harold Bisase is my name. Dr. Harold Bisase. I'm the health technical specialist with World Vision Canada.
For World Vision Canada, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, very good. Well, let me start. Sorry that Grace can't connect, or her audio can't connect, because actually Uganda has been a good user of this tool. But anyway, yeah. So, I think what I'm going to do, the way I'll structure this presentation is to first just walk you through the tool itself, and the sections of it. And then perhaps after you have a better understanding of how the tool is laid out, then when I go on to talk about how you can use it, that will be a little a little clearer. It will help to clarify how you can use it. So in a moment, I'm going to share my screen and show the tool itself. But on this slide, you can see that for the Community Health Committee IQA tool, we have 4 tabs. I may end up consolidating this into 3 tabs just to align it with the other project models. It might be possible to do that, but at the moment, it makes the COMM IQA a little bit of an outlier compared to the other ones that you might be familiar with. So I want to walk you through that so you understand what it is that we're looking at in the COMM. So yeah, Grace still isn't on. So let me do that now. And maybe actually, let's look at this slide for a moment first. The way that the COMM IQA is structured is that the tabs represent sort of whose responsibility is it. And so the first tab looks at the country readiness processes, or the program setup that needs to happen front end at national level before you really get going with your COMM implementation. And most of this is the responsibility of the national office health manager, or equivalent position, and the types of activities that he or she does to get COMM set up together with the Ministry of Health. And we have really laid it out in its own tab in quite a bit of detail because the CHNIS research results showed that the way it's set up is in fact quite important for the success of the program as you go forward with it. So we're considering it now as a quality assurance piece of the model, that the way you set it up nationally is going to influence the quality of the program down the road. And I think if we think about our 4 core health project models, this is especially important for TTC and COMM, because in both of those cases, we're generally working with Ministry of Health structures. So in the case of TTC, we're very often working with Ministry of Health community health worker cadres, right? And in the case of COMM, which means Community Health Committee, we're working with communities that very often are MOH-backed structures. So before we as World Vision jump in and start with our work, that relationship with MOH, or the acknowledgement of the fact that these are MOH structures and cadres, is necessary, and we need to work out our relationship as World Vision with these structures that are MOH-backed. That's a little bit different for PD Hearth and CMAM. Just to maybe paint this overall contextual picture, insofar as PD Hearth normally works with volunteers at community level who may not be as formally linked to the Ministry of Health in the same way that CHW cadres are. Certainly we like to have MOH involved in PD Hearth programming, but it is different at this national level in terms of it being, an MOH cadre or not. And in the case of community management of acute malnutrition, much of this preparation or MOH engagement really happens down at the program level, at the clinic level. There's less that's involved in terms of national level program setup. So just to perhaps explain a little bit why this country readiness tab is so important in the cases of COMM and TTC versus, how that's different for CMAM and PD Hearth. The second tab for COMM is the COMM program functionality. And what we're talking about here are the types of elements that global research shows us are important for the success of community health committees. The way they are set up nationally, the way really that the Ministry of Health has set them up nationally. So has MOH conceived of these programs in such a way that the committees have supervision, support? Is there some type of incentive system set up for these communities? Not usually financial in the case of comms, but some type of incentive, okay. And the responsibility for these elements ultimately rests with the Ministry of Health to set up their community health committee programs in the ways that are laid out on this second tab. We as World Vision are active in ideally working together with MOH to review these elements, assist in putting some of the pieces into place if they are not, but ultimately it's MOH who needs to set this up in the case of the second tab. All right, and we'll go through it when I toggle over to that screen. I'm just hesitating because I don't know if I should toggle over now. Yeah, let me do that. The third tab relates to World Vision field staff responsibilities when they're actually implementing COMM. And the fourth tab relates to the COMM responsibilities. So let me toggle over now, and I think that will help us to see what we're talking about here. So I'll share my screen. And maybe can one person, Sarah, if you could just unmute and let me know if you can see my screen?
We're good, and I'm happy to confirm everybody's audio is now connected.
Great, thank you. Okay, so once again, here's the IQA. Once again, it's got 4 tabs, okay, as I was just explaining to you. The first tab being this country readiness process that needs to take place front end and is the responsibility of the World Vision National Office Health Manager. What was I going to say? Oh, and that our research has shown us is important to the quality of the program moving forward, that the way that the program is set up affects the quality down the road. I'm not going to go over each point in detail. You'll have a chance to look at this, yourselves, and feel free to reach out with any questions. But let me perhaps just highlight some of the elements that we have here. We want to, of course, understand which group is the COMM in any particular country, which is not as easy of a question as you might think. It's different in different settings, and there are some considerations to work through if there is more than one group, for example. What I would like to point out is this point 3B. If we are working in a context where there is no Ministry of Health linked committee, and we had that in the CHNIS research in the case of Guatemala, where since there was no MOH committee, we therefore mobilized new committees, then it actually becomes quite important to make sure that World Vision facilitates linkages with the health facilities and with MOH in these cases, so that the comms are recognized and have, some authority as they move forward. One of the lessons in Guatemala was that, the clinics didn't recognize these committees. They weren't acknowledged by MOH, and so they had a harder time, having their voices and their authority heard. So that's an important point. We have an element related to curriculum. So World Vision has a set of materials for training comms, but if MOH also does, then there are front-end processes of, entering into dialogue with MOH and reaching agreement on the package of materials to use with the comms. We've got a couple of countries where this is a bit of a problem, where they've been moving forward with the World Vision set of materials when, in fact, MOH has a curriculum, which is something that we don't want to do, right? We don't want to work in parallel to what MOH has. So this sort of dialogue with MOH, we want to make sure happens ahead of time. The functionality assessment is the second tab that I was referring to, the types of elements that we want to, we hope to see that MOH has in place for adequately supporting these groups that ultimately are the responsibility of the MOH, but that are, important to try to ensure are in place before we start implementing COMM programming. What I've done here on this tab is pulled out the ones that are perhaps especially important to try to make sure are in place before implementation goes forward. Namely, that the COMM has supervisors, that the supervisors of the COMM have been identified. We would not want to leave the comms without supervision, and if that is not something that's been set up by the MOH, this is something that World Vision together with MOH would want to follow up on. And that supervision system includes at least quarterly supervision contacts. And then the non-financial incentive system being set up or identified. So it's really those two that we've extracted out of the functionality assessment as being of, really high importance to make sure are in place before your implementation goes forward. We want to make sure that the staffing is sufficient to build the comms capacities over time. Essentially what we mean there is that our World Vision DFs are going to follow up with the comms on a regular basis. As Sarah said, I've just been out in the field and I've seen that, the comms were trained, but without the follow-up of either World Vision or Ministry of Health supervisors, it's hard for them to maintain their motivation to carry on working. So we want to make sure that that's in place. We want our monitoring system set up. From the World Vision standpoint, we want to get this up onto Horizon. We want the monitoring tools being used and the indicators tracked. When all of that is sufficiently set up, then that's the point at which you can carry out your training of facilitators. The facilitators being those who will then go on to work with the comms themselves. So it can be World Vision and MOH facilitators. So this is a bit of an overview of the country readiness processes, the steps to go through before you really get going with the COMM implementation. All right, and that is the responsibility of the National Office Health Manager. We've been trying to track these processes across national offices through one-on-one WebExes, and we're, seeing that the processes are moving forward. And once they're in place, it really is a once-off. And yeah, it's a once-off, and then you can move on to the other tabs and follow those over time. The second tab is the functionality assessment, as I said, or in other words, the elements or the components of the Community Health Committee program that you would hope that the Ministry of Health would have set up. And we normally try to carry out a workshop with the MOH to review these components, score them, and then together with the MOH come up with an action plan for strengthening or putting into place those elements that are weak or non-existent. It's possible that I could condense this tab together with the first one, as Polly had done with TTC, and that might help to make the 4 project model IQAs consistent. And as Polly has said, as she and I have discussed, although these responsibilities, strictly speaking, are MOH responsibilities, right? In actual fact, on the ground, there's a lot of cooperation between World Vision and MOH, a lot of assistance and support that World Vision provides to MOH in terms of getting these types of components in place, that indeed it might make sense to just put it all on one tab, and to say that World Vision and MOH together are really looking at all of these things, what I showed you on the first tab, as well as these other components, as being the sorts of things that we want to make sure are in place for the COMM program. Okay, so, but be that as it may, if it's one tab or 2 tabs, all right, these are the sorts of things that we want to look at national level in terms of what it takes to have quality COMM programming. Let me move on to the third tab. I'm wondering if I should pause for questions at this stage, or if it makes sense to go through all of it. Let's see. I don't see any chat questions yet, so maybe let me rather take you through the full tool, and then we'll have our questions. The third tab relates to the facilitator's responsibilities in the field. Okay, so let's imagine now that the country readiness steps have happened. The national level setup is in place. World Vision is actively following up with MOH on any of the structural program components that, still need work, and a training of facilitators has happened. And now the facilitators are going back to their area programs, their APs, their ADPs, and they're starting to work with the comms. So this tab now relates to the area program level, the ADP level. And you would use this tab for each ADP that is implementing COMM. So whereas the first two tabs are once off national level, this tab is used for as many ADPs as you have, and really as often as is needed to track your program quality at area program level. So this is an ongoing one, whereas the other two tabs were really meant to be once off. We have an element related to coverage that, ultimately the DFs are reaching full coverage with the COMM program. That the community preparation takes place so that the communities are aware of the COMMs and what they're meant to do, etc. That the COMM membership is complete, that the facilitators try to ensure inclusive and complete COMM membership prior to moving forward. Then that they carry out, full capacity building of the COMMs, and we can track that here. That they ensure that the COMM facilitators ensure that the supervisory support happens. So whoever the COMM supervisor may be, the COMM facilitators try to ensure that the supervision is happening. Okay, usually the supervisors are MOH, but our DFs can have a role to play in following up on that. And that our DFs follow up themselves with the COMMs, regardless of, if the MOH supervisors are following up, the World Vision DFs should also be following up. And collecting the monitoring information that we're collecting for the COMM program. Perhaps to say that what is listed here in terms of our World Vision staff responsibilities at AP level, this one here regarding the trainings, we're also tracking through our monitoring system. For any of you who have been through the COMM training, you know that we have monitoring tool A, which is meant to track the trainings that facilitators give to the COMMs. So what we therefore have with our IQA, this tab overlaps to an extent with monitoring tool A, just in this tracking of the training. When we go to the last tab, which is what the COMMs themselves do, tracking, the COMMs work in the communities, this is a 100% overlap with our monitoring system. So we have monitoring tool C that we use to collect data on what it is that the COMMs are doing in the community. And it's part of our COMM monitoring system. So this IQA tool, or this tab here, can be used perhaps as a validation or a verification of what we're already collecting through our monitoring system. So, a national office health manager or a TSO staff who's visiting the field, or me when I'm visiting the field, I can use this tab here to structure a focus group discussion with a COMM to understand what it is they're doing, as like a verification of what's coming through the monitoring system. This is a bit different from the other models, in that the other models don't have such a complete overlap of IQA with the monitoring system. And I'm not going to really try to back up and explain the why of that. Well, maybe just quickly to say, no, let me not try to explain that. It's not a problem. It just relates to the different ways that these models work. The COMMs don't work with beneficiaries. They work at the community level. So we track the COMMs in our monitoring, okay? Whereas the CHWs work with beneficiaries, the monitoring system for TTC tracks the beneficiaries, whereas the IQA tracks the CHWs. If that's confusing, don't worry about it. Just to say that this tracking of what it is that the COMMs do on this tab is a repeat of what we collect in our monitoring system for COMM, but it's not a problem. It's a way of verifying what's coming out of the monitoring. So that's the way the COMM IQA is set up, with 2 tabs that relate to national office setup, a third tab related to what our World Vision staff do in the ADPs, and a 4th tab related to what the COMMs themselves do. Let me now maybe pause here for questions. I think I did see something come through on the chat.
The first question is from Carmen, and it's about, you were just going over the different tabs, but can you share your experience and recommendation on exactly when the first tabs could be used? Is it right at the beginning as a guide, or after the COMM is set up, or both? So how often do we use those first 2 tabs, and when do we initiate it?
Okay. Yeah, let me just read the question as well. I can see it. First 2 tabs, right at the beginning.
And then doing his hand.
Hang on. Yep. Okay, just reading the question. Or after things are set up for COMM. Yeah, actually, so Carmen, it's a good question. And ideally, I think that the first tab is useful as a guide for assisting national offices to set up their COMM programs. And in fact, that's what me and my COMM team members are in the process of doing. So we set up calls with national offices implementing COMM, and we work through this tab with them, and it really serves as a helpful guidance for how to set up. If it's like, quote unquote, too late, you know, if a national office is already up and running, they've already set up their COMM program, they're already implementing, then of course it can be used retroactively to take a look at how was it set up, how would you perhaps score yourself in terms of your setup against what we see as being important or essential in your setup. And retroactively, is there any adjustment that you might make? I think it really is ideal if you can walk along with a national office at the time that they are setting up and use this tab or these 2 tabs at that point, but it can also be used retrospectively. Yeah. And then for the implementation tabs, on the other hand, and then I see other questions coming up. So let me maybe perhaps rather toggle over to my slides again, where I have some of this, some of these examples. So what are the purposes then of the IQA? When would you use them? Point number one, it helps national office level staff to know the steps needed to establish COMM programming. So that's the first two tabs, all right? The national level front end stuff. Number two, it helps national office and field level staff know what the field staff responsibilities and steps are for working with comms. So that implementation tab, right, you can and probably should ideally show this or give it to field staff before they begin implementing so that it serves as their own guide for what they're going to do in the field with the comms. It helps the national office staff go, and make field visits perhaps or ask of the field staff to report back on that implementation tab on a periodic basis. Yeah, I think I'm answering your questions as I go through this. It provides a way for national office level staff to track and support field staff. So the field staff can use the implementation tab themselves to track their own work. The national office staff can use the implementation tab to periodically track what the field staff are doing. Field staff can track and assess their own work, right? And we can track the activities of comms through an alternate mechanism besides the monitoring system, for example, FGDs, using the tool. So, the way you use it has all of those various possibilities. Staff themselves can use it to understand their own work and track their own work. National office staff can use it to periodically assess their own work. It can be used in evaluations as well. Yeah, I see that in Polly's question. So I'm doing an evaluation of Swaziland right now. And as field evaluations go forward, they can be used as evaluation tools. Let me answer Polly's question a little more thoroughly in a moment, but maybe Adunya's hand is up, you say, Sarah.
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, it's really helpful to have a quality verification kind of tool. And I know apart from, its service in terms of guiding implementers on what they do, it also helps us in the supervision and so on. But my question is mainly distinguishing between, what is prescriptive and what is a minimum standard. My understanding of like a program quality tool such as IQA should be something at a higher level that can provide a sort of minimum standard in how to design and implement a program, while something that is detailed is a checklist which you have to use usually to verify whatever is being implemented. So I don't know. I'm just struggling to distinguish, what is used as a minimum standard and what is used as a checklist, and to avoid that prescriptive approach instead of providing a minimum standard where programs have to set up their design and also implementation. You get my point?
Yeah, I do, Adunya. I think that the thinking around IQA is that it's all minimum standard. It's all that is needed, that we need for quality. Given, the research and our field experiences and so on. However, I take your point that seeing such long listings of what is considered minimum all of a sudden does come across as very prescriptive. And what we've found in different national offices, for example, is that some of these curriculum ones, for example, a national office might have a lighter touch curriculum, and we all end up agreeing that it's actually okay. So maybe a two-part answer to your question. Part one, this is all supposed to be minimum standard. Part two, however, I think we probably need to go back to that once more and ask ourselves, is this really all minimum standard required?
Yeah, I just see two levels, One is just a non-negotiable minimum standard that everyone has to observe when they design and implement a program, which we can use as an IQA tool. Then another one is a quality improvement and verification checklist, which we usually use, during field visit. For example, in TTC, when you do the home visit, how the community health worker interacts with the household. What are the checklists that we are using? Are the questions appropriate? Is he probing? Is he doing dialogue? How is he sitting? All those details has to come to that lower level, and it should be mainly a checklist, not included in the IQA. So I think if we can distinguish the two, it helps implementers really where to focus instead of going through all these details at a higher level and also at the implementation level. That's my comment. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Adunya. Let me maybe follow up with you. Well, let me follow up around that point. There is overlap, and we've tried to distinguish, and I did a diagram about what is IQA, what is supervision, what is the same, where is supervision the same as IQA. I think the consensus coming out of that, though, is that even if something is considered a supervision checklist that you use with a community volunteer or a clinic staff doing CMAM, these are supervision checklists to, keep track or control how well they're doing what they're doing. However, the feeling has been that at the same time, they are critical for our programming and therefore need to be part of IQA as well. And it's perhaps a bit of something that there may not be complete agreement on, and maybe I can follow up as well. We can have another chat about it. As far as Polly's question, if you were going to use these tools in an evaluation, how would you integrate these tools into an evaluation? So yeah, that's actually what I'm doing. I'm experimenting with right now in Swaziland. I'm piloting sort of a deep dive evaluation process. And so I've created focus group discussion tools to use with COMM members in the case of COMM, with TTC home visitors in the case of TTC. And I've structured the FGDs so that they get us at these points. In other words, I've structured the FGD
Is it just me that's lost sound from Michelle?
visitors and the clients themselves. And then from all of that information, you can use it to score the IQA. So that's how we integrate it.
Michelle, we lost about 30 seconds. So Polly, perhaps, if you didn't catch the full answer, clarify what you were hoping to hear. Carmen's made a comment in the chat about her experience expanding the essential elements for the PD Hearth IQA. That it was helpful for implementers to understand what pieces are important for quality. Some users shared they didn't remember all the key details that were outlined.
Thank you, Carmen. That sounds like a bit of an answer as well to what Adunya was saying. So that's great.
I'm looking for any other hands or questions. I'm not seeing anything, but we're a small enough group, so go ahead and unmute yourself if you would like clarifications. Polly, go ahead.
Yeah, just thinking about Adunya's thing as well. When I did the field test in Mauritania, I have used the new one, which goes back to the 3 scale, the 0, 1, 2, 3. And I remembered that some of you had gone back and changed that following your field test to reduce it to a scale of 0, 1, 2. And I didn't intentionally do that, but I've realized that I've done that. But actually, I still prefer the 3-point scale because I think that you can score 3 where you feel that your implementation or your design is actually an enhancement of the model itself, and that captures that additional standard. And definitely from the data that I've seen, the majority of programs are currently under the standard, but we would hope that, you know, with the use of the IQA, very quickly countries would level out to 2, the score, the maximum score of 2. But then your scale runs out of its utility. There's nowhere to go from there, so there's no point sort of continuing to measure minimum standards once they're achieved, I suppose. But so I think having that slightly bigger scale gives room for improvement, room for innovation as well. That's just a suggestion.
Maybe also one thing I would say around Adunya's question. You'll see that in my COMM IQA, the last 2 tabs distinguish between what World Vision staff do versus what the COMMs do, partly because we have more control, so to speak, over requiring quality of our own staff than we do of requiring it of the COMM. You could say the same thing about CHWs. What our staff do with CHWs to train them and so on is kind of in the control of their job descriptions, their contracts. We've got some control there. Whereas what the CHWs do, we can track it, but we don't have as much control over, forcing them to do things. Likewise with PD Hearth volunteers, our staff versus the volunteers. So I had been keen to separate that out on different tabs. What is World Vision staff responsibility that we have some degree of control over enforcing versus what is the responsibility of volunteers in the field that are not under our direct, contract, that we can track and supervise, but not so much, enforce to say this is what you have to do. These are the essential minimum standards. To get at your point a little bit. But in the end, I think we may not separate the tabs out in that way, distinguishing this is staff, this is volunteers. After a lot of internal discussion, there's some disadvantages to doing it that way. But I think it's nevertheless a little, it's important to keep in mind that distinction between what can we try to really keep control over by using an IQA tool to track and feed back to our staff on, versus what can we supervise through a checklist. I think it's a good point, Adunya. But in the end, it looks like we won't be separating out our IQA tabs that way, and it's okay, because as Polly writes, there are multiple disadvantages to that separation. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question sort of more broadly from your experience. Thinking about policy environment, Sub-Saharan Africa, we're looking at very centralized systems for the most part, with strong Ministry of Health ownership or developing ownership. Whereas in LACRO and Asia, you have much more privatization and decentralization going on. So when you're implementing an IQA for COMM in LACRO or Asia compared to where we're quite more used to working, what differences do you expect in terms of the roles of different stakeholders and entities?
Well, we haven't implemented it in those contexts yet, except for Guatemala. So I would have to think about that a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to have to get back to you on that question, Polly. I'm not sure what the different stakeholders may be. Perhaps you have some thoughts yourself?
I'm just thinking that in LACRO, it seems to be that World Vision has much more direct responsibility for community health workers and their activities. And then in Asia, it's very diverse, where you'll have very strong government leadership and control, like Cambodia. And then other places where it's very decentralized and civil society organizations have almost a complete free mandate to do this kind of work. And I haven't worked that much in Asia apart from Cambodia. So
yeah, it's good points. Those are good points, Polly. Thank you. And we are in an advantageous position with COMM in that, you know, programs are still getting underway, so we're able to use these tools from the outset as opposed to retroactively, which will help us. Yeah, we'll let's see how that does pan out. It will be interesting to see some of those differences. And you're right, we've seen some differences already in Cambodia in terms of, you know, what World Vision can and cannot recommend to MOH. So there are those differences. Grace, you're from Uganda. You may be the only national office staff person on this call. I'm not sure about Joseph Musa or Dave. What's the? Yeah, Joseph Musa. So, Grace, have you had any chance to use this tool?
Yeah. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. We are using the tool in Uganda, and it's really very effective. Only that in the beginning, we engaged the comms more, but we realized that the tool was too complex for them to comprehend. Currently, the project officers are working with the comms to understand the tool but also to use the tool to give feedback to the community through the different reflection meetings that we carry out on a quarterly basis. Hello? Hello?
Okay. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Grace. That's interesting to hear your experiences. Maybe I'll follow up with you as well to ask you a bit more offline.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes, and Joseph, yes, feel
Yes.
free.
Thank you so much. I have been keenly listening to the discussions, although I joined in a little bit late. Yes, for the past 2 quarters, we have been using the comms monitoring tool C. And what we
Yes.
actually did was, after the orientation, we are able to bring the comms together so that we can also orient them on the use of comms monitoring tool C. So that is what we are presently using to reflect our quarterly reports. Although sometimes they are not able to carry out all of the roles or responsibilities in common monitoring tool C, but whatever they are able to undertake is what we report on for that quarter. And it has been very good because they have been using it as a guide so as to which processes to follow through in the communities. For example, tracking health information. They have been able to, for example, get alongside with the MOHS staff, and they have been able to track some of the health conditions at their local communities. And they are working closely alongside with the CHWs. So, in fact, what we usually do is that the CHWs meet every month to get their reports together. So the comms are represented in each of those meetings so that they will be able to get the information from the CHWs. But more especially, linkages and networking has been very good, and the comms are working closely with the other health implementing partners that we are implementing in the same areas where we are doing our AIM Health project. So for me, the comms monitoring to C has been very vital for our programming. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph. It's been very exciting to work with the AIM Health countries as you really do start taking up monitoring tool C. You're the first countries to do so, and we're gonna, be able to start tracking data, which is what we want. So yeah, so if we were to link what you're talking about in terms of monitoring tool C with this tool, the IQA tool, you really have been tracking the fourth tab here, which is what the COMM implementation has, this fourth tab, what it is that the comms are doing with their linkages, as you said, with supporting the CHWs, as you said, and that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you're finding monitoring tool C to be helpful. And then in the call that we had together, I think you were in the call with Nicola Dunn and some of your other team members. We went through the first tab together about the way that your COMM program has been set up in Sierra Leone. And, most everything is in place. And so this first tab is in good shape. The program functionality, I know we're talking about that. So maybe the final way that you might want to make use of this IQA tool is to look at the third tab and just meet with your facilitators and ask them, how do you feel about these points in this third tab, which relate to their own responsibilities with the COMM. And then, yeah, your program will just have been, you know, rolled out on all fronts and using this tool as a way of like tracking the quality of what your program is doing. So yeah, fantastic to hear that update, Joseph. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I think we're at the top of the hour now. I don't know if there's any other questions, Sarah.
Oh, Grace, go ahead.
No, I don't have any questions. I don't have any question, please. Thank you so much.
I had a quick question. Just, are there still two tool sets? So the standard IQA with the basic design implementation, and then this checklist as well. And secondly, how much of this is in French already?
Yeah, no, this one is the one we're using, and no, we don't have it in French. So I know we need it in French.
We are at the top of the hour, and so thanks, Polly, for volunteering to help work with getting it in French, because I know we're looking at running these IQA orientations in a French version, especially for West African countries needing it. All right, so we are at the top of the hour. I just want to say thank you, Michelle, very much for walking us through this IQA orientation, and thank you everybody for joining with your questions and your attention. Michelle, because my computer, will you send me that IQA tool today that you've shown here, as I've been having computer transitions, and I'll make sure we get this IQA tool up on WV Central just as soon as I receive it. And then for the rest of everybody here on this call, the next IQA orientations are still to be scheduled, but we're looking at scheduling PD Hearth, CMAM, and Channels of Hope. I'll be working with several members of our community to make sure that we walk through those orientations in the coming weeks. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Carmen, for helping with guidance from lessons learned from the last ones that were put into French. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you on the next call. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.